Hi, this is Scott. Welcome to the Tall Woodworker. In this video, I'm going to show you how I turned one of these utensil holders out of wood from an unlikely source. Stick around, let's go back in time and I'll show you how I made this. Okay, so I have a confession to make. I bought some wood from a very unlikely place. Amazon. That's right, I bought wood from Amazon. Why? Well, in a lot of cases it was because they had the wood that I needed in a size that I was looking for, and I really didn't have any time to go out to my local lumberyard to pick up the wood. And I know what you're thinking. Well, even at best, you're still looking at 2 days in order to get the wood. Why wouldn't you just go to your lumberyard? Well, these are already in the size strips that I'm going to be needing for this project. Now, I'm not recommending that everybody just go out and buy their wood at Amazon. This is really more of a, let's see what I can get from them. And it's really not too bad. It's not that great, but it's not too bad either. So, the pack that I got had 15 boards. Each board is 3/4 of an inch thick by 2 inches by 24 inches. So all in all, it's a fairly good sized board, and it came with 3 different species, 5 of maple, 5 of cherry, and 5 of walnut. Now I'm just going to be straight up and honest with you. Even though the listing said it's surface 4 sides, this is not perfectly flat square lumber, but it's going to be good enough for what I need to do. And as future Scott has already alluded to, we'll be using this for that project. Now, one of the problems with getting lumber shipped to you is you have no control over what you're getting aside from the species. And as you can see from the maple boards, yeah, these are not consistent. You got some that are really light, some that are dark, and that's just not on the surface. I can see that it's pretty much not a really bright board all the way around. The cherry is a little bit more consistent, but then we go back to some inconsistencies with the walnut. That being said, I still think I can make something out of this. So let's go ahead and start milling this up into the boards that I need for the project. Some of these boards had a bit of a twist in them, so I wanted to rough cut them using the crosscut sled before sending them through the planer. Now, I know a lot of people will say, well, that's what you get for buying lumber from Amazon, but honestly, it's really hard to find perfectly flat boards anywhere that stay flat when you start working on them. Once all the boards are broken down, I send them through the planer to get them down to around 1/2 inch. If I were to do these again, I wouldn't plane them down so much. My thought was that the more I planed them down, the less I had to turn away on the lathe. While this is true, the walls of the canister ended up a bit thinner than I originally wanted. I would have rather spent a little more time on the lathe and had a little bit more wiggle room for shaping. Once the boards are flat, I cut a straight edge off of one edge and put a mark on the board so I would remember which edge is now square. Because these boards were short, I could make solid contact with my fence throughout the entire cut. This would not have been possible had I not broken them down already. There are websites that will help figuring out the proper angle and width of each board to get a circle with the specific amount of segments. Since I had 12 segments, the magic angle was 75-degree bevel on both sides. The site also told me the width to cut these. I'll post the link to the site I used in the description. The nice thing about cutting bevels is that you don't need to adjust the fence to cut the matching bevel. After cutting the bevel on one edge, just flip the board around to cut the other edge. As long as you measure the width of the cut from the top of the cut to the fence, the bevel cut will remove the lower section, keeping the upper face the same width all the way through the board. You could see that by the end of this, my table was looking a bit messy. That's because I cut so many pieces off that fell into the table saw, it actually clogged up my dust collection system. I had to spend quite a bit of time cleaning pieces out and cleaning up the hoses in the dust collector. Once all the bevels were cut on the edges, I could use the crosscut sled to square off the ends. I shave off as little as I could from one end, then cut the other end to length. I kept all of these cutoffs, and I hope to use them in a future project. Time for the glue up. I clamp a straight edge to my workbench, then lay out the boards the way I want to see them in the final project. I line the ends of the boards up to the straight edge, then use blue painter's tape to hold them in place. The top and bottom strips I actually stretch out just a bit to pull the boards together tight. Then I cover the rest of the faces with the tape. Now I've flipped the pieces over and put glue in between all the boards. I make sure the glue flows all the way to the bottom of the groove. This way, when the boards are pulled together, any extra will flow up, giving me the coverage that I need. I put another strip of tape on the end, then carefully roll the boards up into shape. I do my best to ensure that everything is all lined up, and then apply a little bit more tape to hold the shape. I then take some band clamps to make sure there's a good amount of pressure while the glue cures. For the base, I plane down a solid maple board, then cut it to match the diameter of the canister. I use a center finder on both sides to mark the center point, then stabbed into that point with an awl. Next, I take a circle compass to mark one side with a 3.5 inch circle to mount to the lathe. Using some quick and thick glue, I mount the base to a block that I mounted to the lathe faceplate and wait for it to dry. I don't have a large disc sander, but I did make a sanding platen to use with the lathe. This is just a couple pieces of plywood that I mounted to a faceplate and stuck an adhesive sheet of sandpaper to. It works really well to make sure the base of the glue up is nice and flat. I glue the maple base to the sanded part of the canister, then send a few brad nails in to hold it in place. I can then use the lathe as a clamp while I wait until the next day for the glue to fully cure. The next day, I take off the band clamps and the tape to see what I've got to work with. Before turning, I decided to cut these corners off the base with a flush trim saw. There's no point in turning these away with the lathe tools, it's just going to take a lot of time, so this would actually speed things up a bit. Time to finally get some turning done. I start on the outside and try to keep the shape as straight as possible. The platen on the tailstock gives a little extra support during the initial roughing. As this spins around, there are 12 individual wood joints that the tool has to carve down. This can be a bit stressful on the joints in the beginning, so I go slow and make my cuts light. I'm using carbide tools as I feel I have a bit more control over them versus the steel tools. Once most of the corners have been knocked down, I do remove the platen and turn the rest of the outside until I have a completely even turned cylinder. These red marks you see me putting on right now give me some visual reference as to what still needs to be turned. Once I don't see red anymore, I can tell that the outside is done. I was feeling a bit anxious about doing the inside of the bowl. I've never done a segmented turning before, and there was a lot of judder on the tool as I carved through all that dried up glue and all the wood pieces. My biggest fear is that the tool would catch on something and just send this thing flying across my workshop. And I just spent a lot of time getting this to shape. I didn't want that to happen. But just like with the outside, I take my time, go slow and take light, shallow cuts. I stop frequently to check progress and make sure to vacuum out all the dust that gets sent inside the canister that doesn't come out easily. Getting all the way down where the sides meet the base of the canister was getting really tough with the carbide tools. So I actually used a skew chisel just to try to get that corner nice and cleaned up. Didn't get it perfect, but I got it a lot better than I could with the larger carbide tools. Eventually, I get both the inside and the outside shaped smooth, and I can move on to the sanding. I start by taking a 60 grit sanding disc to the inside and the outside, just to get rid of any tool marks that were left from the turning. Then I switch over to my right angle drill with a sanding disc to finish up the sanding all the way up to 220. To sand the base, I use this extension rod for the sanding disc to reach all the way in there. So one of the problems with sanding on a lathe is the lathe turns only in one direction. This can make the project feel really smooth when you run your hands one way, but then when you run your hands the other way, it can still feel just a bit rough. So using a sanding sealer can really help with avoiding this issue. I just rub a few coats on to the inside and the outside and let it dry for a few minutes. It doesn't really take that long. I can then turn the lathe on and then sand it down using some Quad Zero steel wool. Now for the final coat. When combined with the sanding sealer, this Mylan's high friction polish gives a super smooth finish with only a touch of gloss. I apply it liberally to the outside and the inside, and then turn the lathe on. Using the cloth with a little remaining polish, I can apply friction to generate heat, which cures the polish. To remove the canister from the lathe, I carve a little bit into the base to remove some of the waste block that's attached to the lathe. I then finish cutting it off with a flush trim saw. Now, unfortunately, this method of removing it from the lathe left a little bit of rough material on the base. So to remove this, I put a 60 grit sanding disc on my angle grinder and proceeded to just remove the material away. Once the roughness was gone, I could switch over to my random orbital sander, sand it to 220, and then apply the finish by hand. And here we have the final canister. So this turned out really nice, no pun intended. And considering it was wood from Amazon, I'm very impressed with the way this turned out. And you may have noticed that I cut up a lot of wood. So I didn't just make one of these, I actually made 4 of these. So the original intention when I made this was to just make the one for myself and my wife, but I decided, well, why stop there? I had enough lumber, I knew I could make 3 of them, and here we are. So I'm actually going to be keeping this taller one, which is actually the first one I made before I hit the record button on the turning, and so we're keeping this one. But these 3 I'm going to be putting up for sale on my Etsy store, so if you are interested, go ahead and hit the link down below in the description and that'll take you to the page. I have 2 of them that are identical where it's an equal amount of maple, walnut, and cherry. And because I ran out of walnut and cherry, this one is a 50-25-25 blend. So it's 50% maple, 25% walnut, and 25% cherry. But they all turned out absolutely amazing. I'm super happy with the way these look. And yeah, this one's mine. You can't have this one, but you can have one of these. So if you like the video, go ahead and lightly tap or click on the thumbs up icon. Anybody else get tired of people saying smash the like button? Yeah, just go ahead and lightly tap it. Don't smash it. Don't break your screen. Don't break your mouse. Just lightly tap. And if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. I've got a few more projects that I should be able to get finished before it gets too cold here in Chicago and I have to pack up and go back to just doing some basic turnings over the winter. So be sure to subscribe to my channel to see what's coming up. Until next time, thanks for joining me in my shop.